Hello, my name is Jarrett Hutchison, and I decided to do the video assignment for How Are the Historical Books Different? And the reason why I wanted to do the video assignment real quick is because this stretches me, it gets me out of my comfort zone, and I believe it helps to really cement my knowledge because this is something that I am shaking my boots with. But I hope you appreciate this. But now jumping into it, you wanted us to discuss how the historical books are different from other Old Testament books and New Testament books. So the first key thing to point out is the subject matter that you had asked us about. The subject matter is different because it has a bunch of different subgenres in it. It's not one specific genre, so it could have also inside of it lineage, could have poetry, different other genres just running through it. So it kind of keeps you on your toes. Make sure that you're focused when you're studying it. So I thought that was kind of cool, kind of different. Um, Another thing that I thought was cool this is to remember the historical books and their context. Even though context is important in all the other Old Testament books and New Testament, I think it's always an important point to underscore for me that context is huge. I need to understand like location and different things. Different people that were involved and things that were going on. Because it hinders you if you don't have that when you're trying to interpret different things. So look for another big thing is to look for motives. Look within the text. Why is the author writing this? What purpose could he have? Why might the author want to be recording this specific thing for us? Is he doing this for a specific purpose? And different things like that. Kind of like we pointed out last week in the fact that a lot of royal houses recorded history. So I thought that was cool to just make note of again and just cement that in my mind that it could have a motive behind it that's not always like, oh yeah, this is for history's sake. Um, so I thought it was also cool to note that it's not devotional or it's not specific devotional content that we're supposed to be looking for within the history books. And I thought that was important to note because a lot of times I fall into the trap of trying to find devotional content where I shouldn't be. And what I mean by that is like I'll be reading the New Testament. I'm like, okay, I need to find something that the author's speaking to me, is saying to me here. How are they speaking to me? But within the history books, there's not always a specific thing that the author's trying to say. Sometimes they're just recording history, recording an event. So I thought that was interesting to note, especially for me, that it's not for all readers at all times. It could be for certain readers at certain times, but definitely like don't try and force the subject, especially when it doesn't fit, which sometimes I feel like I do when I struggle with. So I was very thankful that pointed that out. Jumping on to the next point, theological themes. Theological themes are important, and it's different to think about because when you think about theology, you're like, obviously it's important. It's in the Bible. But then specifically within the Old Testament history books, I thought it was different because within the readings this past week, I saw that the ideological and theological theology has some concerns about it. So I thought that was interesting to point out that you have to be really careful when studying it. So you have to understand: is the account when you're looking at it, was it interrupted so that the author or the Yahweh God could interject some type of statement or judgment or meaning or observation, or was it, or is there no interruption? Is it just continuing on with the story of just laying down facts? What extent are they laying down space for this? I thought that was another key point to point out. Does it have a lot of space to it? Is it just a few sentences? Is it a few chapters? So that's kind of cool too to realize maybe this is more important because they devote more time to it. So kind of just to get in the author's head that way, and then to understand what extent themes maybe are part of earlier biblical books, different things like that you're looking for within the historical books that you're looking for elsewhere outside of history, uh, outside the history books. And what I mean by that is, okay, it's within the historical book. It looks like something that could have a theological theme to it. Is it within other Old Testament books? Is there outside sources where I can look at this outside of this book that they're referencing? So just pointing that out there, and notating that, I think, is important, because then that kind of makes sure you're utilizing all your resources, I should say, and studying appropriately. And then specifically, how are they applied to the Christian life? So I thought this was important, a really good question too, because I don't always think how the historical books apply to my Christian life today. New Testament, even some of the Old Testament, like I can see, but the Old Testament historical books specifically, like how can I apply them to today and take something out of it? So I thought it was cool because the author pointed out a few key points. Do not take these as like, oh, I'm telling you to do something, do this. It's sometimes just describing what actually happened. So it's not like you're looking in there for like some type of prescription, like, oh, I'm sick, I need to do this or that. No, sometimes it's just recording what actually happened. So you need to be careful. I thought it was cool that when you're studying it, you could look at it. You need to look for themes for your Christian life of like cause and effect. You can look for a lot of that in the Old Testament historical books. Okay, this person sinned, and now we see punishment coming out of it, or we see this person being obedient. We see someone's obedience being rewarded with them being blessed. So just taking out those key points. And then I thought it was also cool to notate a direct quote that the author had said, just because I thought it was really cool for my understanding of the Old Testament historical books. Inspiration does not mean a sort of dictation, where the human authors were simply automated like machines. So I thought it was kind of cool because they're not just automated machines. They could throw in some type of imagination, some type of their own flavor, I guess, if you will, into it. So I thought that was important to point out too, because sometimes I think about it just being like, God's directing the pen, which yes, it's inspired by God, but also just to point out the fact that, okay, just because it's inspired by God does not mean that the human author cannot have some type of not interjection, sway in what is being put across. I guess the ideas, how they're being put across, and like I said before, like imagination. Like it could be the idea comes from God, and then the author uses his imagination to get the idea across. So you have to remember that there's actual physical authors behind these. So I thought that was super cool. Really enjoyed this week's assignment. Really struggled with this video. But again, I really hope you enjoyed it, and it was great